Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this redgamingtech.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. And we're going to start things out with the next generation consoles, both their performance relative to one another in the eyes of Ed Boon, and we're also going to discuss the PS5's ray tracing capabilities. So the PS5, we know, does have some form of ray tracing, but Sony haven't really commented on how that solution is implemented into the system. We don't know whether it's going to be hardware based or whether it's going to be software based or a mixture of the two. Microsoft, meanwhile, have confirmed that the next generation Xbox will have hardware ray tracing. Looking at AMD's GPU roadmap, we can see that the current generation of Navi cards, which is based upon the RDNA architecture, does not have hardware ray tracing. The next generation of Navi cards, which will be based on RDNA 2, it does have some form of hardware ray tracing enabled. In fact, I actually leaked this back in March of this year. But what's really interesting is that despite Sony not officially confirming this hardware ray tracing support, if you actually read the Wired interview, Mark Cerny did seem to allude to the fact that there would be hardware ray tracing support, and since then the interviewer, I'm sorry I've forgotten the chap's name, did mention that the ray tracing discussion was generally involving around graphics, so it would be kind of odd if it was like audio ray tracing capabilities, which is obviously considerably less taxing. But there's an interview which is doing the rounds on the website Gaming Bolt. I'll link the interview in the description of this video. And in this interview, a developer was quoted in saying that the Zen 2 CPU makes ray tracing on the PS5 commonplace for next generation games. So let's read out the quote first. So Matthew Vigiloni, who is the co-founder of SEMA Project, says, and I quote, according to Gaming Bolt, that the PS5 Zen 2 processor is going to empower just that is ray tracing. Vigilone told Gaming Bolt in an interview, with the new tech in the consoles, the next generation ray tracing will be like lens flare, and with the new tech, there will be reflections everywhere. And ray tracing will be like lens flare for the next generation consoles. He then went on to discuss other things such as what publishers will be doing, gaming, and so on and so on. So the big takeaway you can have from this interview is that the Zen 2 is obviously the CPU, right? I mean, it's not the GPU, it's the CPU, so what the heck is going on? Well, I decided to contact the developer myself, and I got a couple of quotes from him. I'll plonk on the Twitter conversation on screen so you can read it yourself, but I will read it out to you just in case you're doing something else. We don't actually have a development kit yet, just the development kits for last generation. And I actually didn't know that the interview was online yet because he answered the questions around a month ago. He said it's not exactly a misquote, but it is out of context. I was just talking about the entire next generation of consoles, and I think that there will be visual cues the developers of big games will use to watermark their games as new. If you're not quite certain what he means by that, he basically means that ray tracing, in his eyes anyway, will be used by AAA developers or developers who have larger budgets to basically be like, hey, look, this game looks different and all reflective and shiny and stuff, basically to show, hey, this is the next generation. But that was conjecture based upon things we'd seen at GDC and release specifications of the hardware and not any experience with the next generation development kits. So I asked him then, do you have any idea regarding the final specs of the machine or whether hardware ray tracing is part of it? That is, of course, in relation to the PS5, and he said no. Not yet. So the reason I want to bring this up is because several people had already messaged me or had involved me in conversations regarding this being conclusive proof that the PS5 does not have hardware ray tracing or how it stacks up against the Xbox. And this actually brings us to another developer. You might know him, he's somewhat influential in the industry, and that is Ed Boon. Ed has been around for so long in the games industry, it's very hard to not take anything he says with a huge amount of respect, and this is what he said via Twitter. The Xbox Scarlett is more powerful than the PS5. The PS5 is more powerful than the Xbox Scarlett. How? How can anyone confidently make either statement without having worked on the final hardware of each? I also want to bring in to the equation Tim Apisak, who is very well known of finding leaked hardware via various benchmark databases and other such things. So you might recall that he was the first individual to find the Gonzalo APU, which among other things appears to have an 1800 MHz clock frequency for the GPU. We see the CPU speed here and so on, although it doesn't give us the entire performance of the next generation system, but most folks would agree that it appears to be the PlayStation 5 APU, or at least an engineering sample form of the PS5 APU. So the scores you're seeing here are actually 3D Mark scores, and the PS4, to give us some level of context, in his digging, scores around 5,000 for the PS5 APU. The Gonzalo APU is scoring over 20,000 points. So you could say, well, that means that the PS5 is going to be around 4 times faster than the PS4. So just to clarify, that is the base model PS4 that would score 5,000. And I guess my point with all of this is it's very fun to discuss the features of the next generation systems. Indeed, I'm going to be doing an all you need to know about Xbox Scarlett, and I'm going to also do one for the PS5 now that I've got the all you need to know about the Ryzen 3000 thing out. By the way, thanks for all of the support for that video. I'll try to remember to link it in the video description. It's got a really great reception, and I'm really happy with the work that I did overall. There's a couple of things that maybe I would have changed, kind of thinking back on it, but overall I'm really happy with the video. So if you've not checked it out yet, feel free to do so. But getting back to the consoles, it's very fun to talk about the feature sets, but it's impossible to actually call yet which of the two systems is more powerful. And so it's really cool to talk about like the possibilities and potential of no loading screens. It's very cool to talk about the implementation of ray tracing. But what we can't do yet, we can make predictions of the T-flops of a console, we can make predictions of the CPU speeds and whatever else, but we can't actually definitively say which system is more powerful, because not only do we not have all of the specifications yet, but, you know, last minute these specifications can change. And I will be delving much deeper into the APU, the SOC, APU and SOC are basically the same thing, the APU, the GPU, and other characteristics of the next generation systems. But I did want to get the Zen 2 thing out first, because it's going to form the basis of a lot of the stuff I'm going to be discussing, particularly when it's relating to like cache sizes and so on. So now I want to move over to a quick piece of Intel news, and this concerns the Generation 11 graphics, and that they will actually be supporting integer scaling with Generation 11. They could not, unfortunately, implement it with Generation 9 because it would basically be a software hack, and according to Lisa Pierce, who heads the driver team over at Intel, it just would not be particularly great. The performance would suffer, and the team just feels, well, that it's not really worth it. But why is this so cool? As many of you know, 1440p as well as 4K screens are becoming more prevalent in PC gaming, and iGPUs, and obviously Intel want to get into discrete graphics as well, but iGPUs are also, you know, getting up there in performance now. Let's say for the sake of this video that you're running natively, your graphics card can handle 1080p, but you want to run on a 1440p display. Well, at the moment there are a couple of different methods of doing that. You could use bilinear, or what have you, or nearest neighbor. The problem is that this does add a level of blurring to the image, which isn't exactly what you want, particularly in certain genres of games. For example, if you're playing on titles on an emulator, not that necessarily I imagine that Intel will probably condone that, or you're playing games which are heavy in pixel art, so a lot of the 2D titles that are on like Steam or, you know, whatever, they don't really do too well when you're using what is essentially a blurry upscaling technique. So with the integer scaling, this actually fixes that, and you'll get razor sharp pixels. It won't necessarily be the best way to upscale for all games, but it is nice that it will be supported. And this was actually a request, the #1 request from a Reddit AMA. So Intel have actually responded to this really quite fast. And I think that's really cool that they have responded to it so quickly. So I wanted to just kind of bring it to your attention, because if you are thinking of purchasing a device with Generation 11 graphics and you run, emulator titles and so on, this could be a really nice feature for you. And next up is AMD and the Ryzen 3950X, or at least we believe it's a Ryzen 9 3950X, because the CPU ID is being obscured, and it is almost certainly an engineering sample or a qualification sample, because if you look at the clock frequency of the base clock, it doesn't match what the 3950X retail is going to be running at. But the big story here isn't, what the CPU is, despite my making a big deal of it for a moment. It's actually the fact that the CPU is absolutely demolishing Geekbench. We'll get into scores in just a moment. But the reason it's doing that, the reason that the scores are just absolutely crazy, is because the clock frequency for this CPU is 5.2 gigahertz. So let's have a look at the CPU. So first of all, the CPU is being run on an X570 Godlike motherboard by MSI, and the name of the CPU is AMD 100, lots of zeros, 33-01. It is a 16-core, 32-thread part. So that does sound an awful lot like, that's right, the 3950X. But the base frequency is 3.3 gigahertz, which is obviously a little slower than what you would get for the 3950X, but the maximum frequency is 5.2 gigahertz. Now, I would like to point out that this is not, the single core speed and it's turboing up to that. That is actually all of the cores, because if you add .gb4, obviously you can see it on screen here because I'm nice and lovely like that, you can see that it is actually doing it through all of the different tests. It's not just doing it on the single thread tests for Geekbench, and it is actually hitting over 5200 megahertz quite happily for the frequency. So it's actually nice that you can do that. And yeah, so the clocks, I'm actually going to be doing this more. A couple of you have actually requested I do this more frequently, and you're right, it would be nice for me to do it, so I'm going to be making that change. So anyway, you can definitely see the difference in frequency is basically zero throughout this testing. You're getting 1 or 2 megahertz deviations here and there, but essentially it's running, we can all agree, for all cores at over 5200 megahertz. So what does that mean? Well, it basically means it ruffle stomps everything from a great height. Shockingly, if you're running the CPU at this clock frequency, it basically demolishes everything. And by shockingly, it's like me saying to you, well, if I jump into water, I'm going to be wet. The single core score is 6714, and the multi-core score is 64,953. So let's just, for the sake of my sanity, call that 65,000 points. Which is, well, yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? Let's just be honest. To give us a point of reference, the 9980XE, which is an 18-core part, will score around the 5600 mark. Obviously, it does depend on the rest of the setup, that usual caveat, but the multi-core score for a CPU such as this is going to be around the 50 to 60,000 mark, once again, depending upon the overclocking of the CPU. You can certainly get lower than that if the clock frequencies are kind of, a little bit neutered and you don't have particularly fast memory. You could get under 50,000 points, but once again, 50,000 to, kind of low 52,000 is what you're going to get, particularly if the CPU is overclocked slightly. So all of that means that it's incredible. This CPU, the 3950X, is going to cost you just $749.99, so $750, which is obviously a considerable saving. Problem is that this CPU is not being overclocked with a $20 cooler from Amazon or wherever you buy the cooler. This is not being cooled by AMD's stock cooler. I just want to clarify that, because a number of websites are reporting this like you could run this off of, you know, like a $20 heatsink that you could just find off of like, you know, some eBay or whatever, and that is obviously not the case. This CPU is being cooled with exotic cooling, and by exotic cooling we are referring to LN2 here. And the reason we know this is because of other things from AMD themselves. Don't forget at the E3 2019 presentation, when AMD were running all of the chips and trying to break those world records when they were giving them to all of those overclockers, you literally saw them using liquid nitrogen pots to hit over 5,000 megahertz. And this is not me criticizing the chip. I want to be clear on that. But what I don't want is lots of people to be buying these chips and then expecting 5.2 gigahertz to be like doable on a basic AIO, that, or, you know, even a custom water cooling loop. That's very, very unlikely. I mean, sure, you might hit the silicon lottery, but it's very improbable. Indeed, there's an image that is very telling, and that is that the CPU at 5 gigahertz was running liquid nitrogen, and you could see the voltages to do that were rather high. It was 1.6 volts. Now, that is possibly because these are kind of not final engineering samples. You can actually see, by the way, the code name does match basically what we've seen already from the Geekbench result. But I think we can all agree that we're not going to be seeing this clock frequency on a typical day-to-day usage basis, unless of course you're happy to strap a liquid nitrogen tank to your system. As I mentioned in yesterday's video with my all you need to know about the Ryzen 3000, plug, push, go and watch it. It took me a lot of time to edit and record, push. This is not going to be a situation where I'd ever recommend you just buy something because it's new. I do feel that the Ryzen 3000 series is probably going to be a really impressive launch. I actually have a lot more confidence in it than I do with the RX 5700 series, but, you know, I'll wait and see on that. We all know that Super is going to be a thing, and I've heard from multiple people now basically confirming, and AIB's confirming to me that we will see Super launch in July. I can't give any more information than that, unfortunately. But anyway, what I will tell you is that the Ryzen 3000 series is going to be really impressive, but obviously we don't know yet whether it's going to be the best for all scenarios. And it's possible with the multi-threading, multi-core score that it may not scale 100% based upon certain tasks, because obviously it is still using dual channel memory. Yes, it has a crap ton. That's an official amount, by the way. You can look that up. It's a technical term of level 3 cache, or as AMD are trying to rebrand it, game cache. And that obviously will certainly help in a lot of benchmarks and tasks. But will you be able to run, just for the sake of argument, Blender exporting a model while at the same time screwing around with, like, I don't know, an export in Adobe After Effects while at the same time trying to do something else? I don't know, and most people don't at the moment because they don't have a sample to test this with. So I'm just saying, I think these chips are going to be amazing, but I don't necessarily know if they're going to be a complete replacement for the TR3 platform or Threadripper, and whether they're going to, you know, beat all of Intel's lineup as well. We're going to have to wait. And as I mentioned previously, we do know that the 64-core Threadripper processors will be released at some point. I'm hearing it's going to be this year, not next year, but I'm trying to find out more information regarding that. Anyway, I think that just about does it for this video. I'm recording a lot earlier in the day than normal, but honestly all of this news did pop up and I'm like, well, I might as well cover it, right? So, if you've enjoyed it, the video that is, then you can subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. And I'd also like to re-extend my thanks for helping us pass over 63,000 subscribers. I know I did that as we were hitting it, but I just figure it's nice to do it again for those who missed the original video. So, you know, it's kind of weird to be over 63,000 subscribers, but also really cool. So if you're not already subscribed, feel free to do so, and also do the normal thing of like sharing the video, because it does help out a lot. I hate to be a pain and ask that, but you know, if you like the video and that type of stuff, it really does help us. with the channel. But hopefully you're going to have a great day. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.